vehicle supply equipment work group meeting. I'm going to take attendance to make sure we have quorum. You have myself, Ben Baker, on behalf of the Maryland Public Service Commission. Senator Hettleman?
Here.
Excellent, thank you. Senator Watson? Delegate Frazier Hidalgo? Delegate Allen? Rachel Jones?
Here.
NDA? Excellent, thank you. Comptroller's Office? Tim Pedro?
Here.
Excellent, thank you. Amanda Hine, MDOT?
Here, thanks.
Excellent. MEA? Natalie, are you representing Diego today?
Yes, for now, and then Diego hopefully will be on around 2.
Okay, thank you. Scott Wilson?
I'm here. Thanks.
Excellent. Paul Brzezinski?
I'm here.
Welcome back. I hope you had a relaxing time.
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Josh Cohen, I believe he is going to join us at 2. Matt Chen. All right. That leaves us with 8. So we have quorum. Those of you who are not members, please put your name and affiliation in the chat, and we will record that for our notes. All right. So, everyone, thank you for joining. Just a couple technical things. Brett Sproul, one of our commission advisors, is going to be our IT support today. I am doing this from a KOA campground in Ohio, so please bear with me if there's any technical issues. Let's see here. The goal of today, I would say the biggest thing is we really do need to have what I would call a serious draft framework. It's not that it needs to be hammered out. It's not that all the details need to be figured out, but really we need a straw man that you all can take back and work around the edges on. And what I would like to make sure is that we are kind of at a point where we're like, we could go this way or this way. It doesn't mean that we have compromise today, but these are the 2 options. These are the 2 or 3 options on the framework, so that when we get together next time, we can really start to like lay the foundation of moving on from the framework. Because our report is due end of October. So for me and my team to start drafting, it would be helpful to have the framework figured out here within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And it would also help with the state agencies coming up with budgets. So that is what I'm going to focus on today. I've put aside an hour of the meeting for it. I'm okay if that ends up taking a little longer. We also, as part of that discussion, I will ask the state agencies and anyone else who wants to weigh in on brainstorming what the state agencies, think you need to develop a budget. Because I would say that's going to be one of the key things that goes in this report, because one of the main question is who should oversee such a framework. And obviously one of the questions from the state is going to be who should pay, or the question will be what's my costs and how are we getting the money? And so I would say the most important thing, and so what I will ask the state agencies to do after this meeting is over the next month, is to start thinking about if you were asked to do this work, what would it cost? And so what I'd like to do is, so think of it as if somebody passed a law and said you were going to do it, and you had to give DLS your assumed budget, what do you think it would be? And that's what I'm going to ask you to develop over the next month or so. So I wanted to give today as an opportunity to ask questions about what you think you need. Obviously, we have some resources that can look into this. Also, we have a number of interested EVSEs who have been dealing with this in other states who might also be able to give some ideas of things that maybe we haven't thought about. And then the last part of the meeting is I want to start going through all those, I would call them business requirements, the nuts and bolts of this. And that's something that I would say at the next meeting, we would do what we're going to do today with the draft framework, which is hammer out details and that kind of stuff. but to allow for more general discussion for you all to understand it. But today's end goal is to have a serious draft framework. So before I get going, any questions or anything else people want to see covered today or at the next meeting that I did not discuss? All right. And then if you have questions, I might not be able to see your hand raised. Brett will inform me. So either raise your hand or drop a message in the chat and Brett will let me know. All righty. Let me pull up the spreadsheet. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. All righty. So first part of the framework, and I would say probably one of the key fundamental questions of this when we're discussing uptime, meter accuracy, an idea of like anything that has to do with regulations is who should be subject to it. At the last meeting, we discussed this idea, and I would say that we came down on kind of two areas. There was if you are providing the station for commercial purposes, so basically if you are making money with the station, you would probably be subject to this framework. And then Scott put forward a broader interpretation and said, look, if the consumer or does not have the ability to fix it themselves, and what that means is that, like let's say Ben Baker had his own EVSE equipment for my own personal use, well, I could spend my own money to fix it. But if I live in an HOA and that I don't have control of that EVSE, I can't make the purchase to fix that, spend the money to pay a company to come fix it, then that EVSE equipment, even if it's not being used for anything outside of the mud, would fall under this framework. And so those were kind of the two, and I would probably call those the two broad strokes of this. We can either go, you are making money with this, it's for commercial use, that would fall more closely under the handbook 44 interpretation of rules for electric vehicle supply equipment, and then versus the HOA or basically everything except personal use charging stations and or stuff meant for internal to a business use charging stations would fall under this framework. We did receive some feedback on this. MDA basically that they gave us their commercial assumption. MDOT, Amanda, would you like to? You gave me some updated information from last meeting to this meeting, so you'd like to weigh in on where you all were at?
Yeah, Ben, and thanks for incorporating the amendments as quickly as possible. So I'd actually clarify that what's displayed on the screen, I would, MDOT has updated our recommendations to actually not include, or like to include utility and state-owned charging stations. Essentially, I think we're leaning towards a definition more similar to Scott Wilson. I guess let's see. Okay. Yeah, so we're thinking public use, including we sort of deemed charging stations at MUDs that are not just owned by an individual, and for workplace charging to also be considered semi-public and should be subject to the framework. That's sort of our biggest update, and to include utility-owned charging stations.
Thank you. All right, Scott, is there anything else you want to add to your definition of what I verbally put out there?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty much in line with what I was thinking before. So yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Awesome. So I guess I'll go around the horn getting people's views. Senator Hellman, I'll start with you. Your thoughts? It's also okay if you haven't had a chance to think about this.
Sorry, I
No worries.
have not had a chance to extensively go through it, but I guess one of the questions I have is what is missing here? What are we not including now that this was just changed? Obviously, we're not including private, individually, paid for chargers. But, and
Right.
also private industry that for use in their own, for the, their own use.
Right. I would say the gray area, so I think everyone would agree if you and I had our own equipment at at our house, or it was in my own private like parking spot within a condo building, that's not subject to this. I think people would also agree, and everyone in the group weigh in if I'm getting this wrong, would also agree that if it is a, how would I put it? If let's say BG&E has their own fleet of electric cars and they have their own stations on site for those cars, or
Right.
spread out across their territory, that would not be subject to it. So I guess like let's take if I guess you could take a trucking company who has invested in their own network, maybe that would not be subject to this. But that one, I will say, I think has some gray area after listening to the comptroller, or not comptroller, sorry, Department of Agriculture last week, because they were indicating there are some fleets out there that they do oversee their equipment because they allow it to be used by multiple groups. So let's say that there were 3 trucking companies, like there's a I would say there's a gas station that it's privately owned, it's not owned by, but the only people allowed to use it are private companies that have contracted with them. I think MDA, tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like that group is subject to your framework for gas stations today, and would also, in your view, be subject to Handbook 44 rules.
I believe so, Ben.
Okay. So that would be a gray area, but I do think that's a little caught up in Scott's definition, because that falls under this idea that those 3 companies that contracted with that station, they personally cannot use, or they would not be able to fix the station if it was down. And then, how would I put it? And so then I'd say the other gray area to me is like, let's say we have a common use mud area where the HOA or the condo building has put up charging equipment for the personal use of their tenants under the Scott Wilson definition, and I think maybe also under what you had put in your law in the first place. They would be subject to this framework because, once again, those tenants couldn't fix the equipment. It would be on the HOA to fix the equipment. It might be, but they're not. But they might not really be selling that for commercial purposes. It might just be an add-on to appease the residents or to help market the condo. And so, as we discuss this framework, it might be that certain use cases, such as those, we might create, when I say an exception, it might be that they're subject to part of the framework, but they're not subject to maybe all of the framework. And that's something we could discuss, and maybe whoever the implementing agency is, we give them the flexibility to decide how in depth certain groups have to go with complying with all the rules that we think maybe these things should be subject to. Because it might be like, let's take an HOA who doesn't have unlimited funds versus a private company that does this to make money. And so that's something that we'll probably want to suss through. But I would say under the Scott definition, that what I just explained to you would be encompassing. Does that help?
It does, and I do like the parameter that if you have control over the ability to fix it. And you're right with regard to the multi-use, like the HOA example that you gave. I think it was our intention to have those included. Even though they might be a slightly different circumstance, but thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah. Keep in mind also that the framework can have different levels of response for different categories of chargers. So you're not going to have the same sort of enforcement, as it were, for MUDs as you would for public DC fast charging. So we can calibrate the response within the framework.
Right.
So, for
And I
example,
think,
a
and I
MUD might
would
just get a letter that says, "Hey, we've gotten complaints from residents," you know, and then a DC fast charger would be have a stronger response. So.
No, I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, especially when we get down to the enforcement section, because I do think we will need to. I think if we're going to go, I think if this is going to encompass more than just those who are trying to make money off of this, we will want to consider different, I guess, levels of action around this. So yes, I would agree with you, Scott. All right,
I think
state agents, go ahead.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. All right, state agencies, go ahead and weigh in. You can go ahead and speak up because I can't see you. All right, state agencies, I guess here's probably a better question. Do state agencies have any concerns with this broader approach that we're discussing? MDA, MEA, I know MDOT's already kind of there.
No issues on MDA's part, Ben. No issues on our part. We
Okay.
will implement or draft regulations according to whatever the work group decides, but we don't have any issues.
Okay.
And Ben, Natalie in the chat said not at this moment. So just wanted to
Thank you, Brett.
reiterate that. Yep.
Thank you. All right. Paul, I haven't heard from you.
I'm good with the definition that's evolved. I think that takes care of the issue, and the gradation of enforcement, I think, makes a whole lot of sense.
Okay, thank you. Before I move on from this, non-work group members, I will give you 3 to 5 minutes if you have anything that you want the members to think about in this area. So if you want to raise your hand, I'll have Brett start calling you out. Brett, any hands or anything? Go ahead.
Michael Krauthammer has his hand raised, so go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. Just one comment on the recommendation about different levels of oversight or enforcement. Granted, the subject was just raised moments ago, but my initial response is that implementing different levels of response could be very challenging, and that's just my initial thought. I think a lot of work would have to go into this idea of how you rank different chargers for different levels of scrutiny, oversight, fees, response, and whatnot. I'm not sure that chargers really naturally fall into clear buckets. So while I appreciate the sentiment and it could be a very beneficial approach, it could also be complicated. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And Michael's with the Alliance for Transportation Electrification.
Yes, thank you, Ben.
Yep, no, thank you. All right. Anyone else, Brett?
Yep. And then we have Delegate Fraser Hidalgo also has his hand raised. So feel free to go ahead.
Go ahead, Delegate. And he is one of the members, so yes. Yes, go ahead, Delegate.
Thank you very much. It seems to me like we're covering it pretty well. I mean, at the end of the line, I guess the very base of this is that if there's an opportunity, or if you are actually making money from other people, in other words, if you're selling electrons and you're putting anything on top of that, or you're measuring, then I think that there should be some oversight. I don't know if that's basically what we've come to. Sorry, I was about 9 minutes late on the call, but that's kind of my view. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no worries. And that's where this, I'd say this group is kind of coming down on. I think everyone is pretty much in the camp of if you're making money off of this, you should be subject to the framework. And then we were talking about a broader catch up in terms of those who might be providing it more as, like when we're talking about MUDs, um, or certain maybe some other charging aspects like a MUD where it's really not being provided for true, it's not really being provided for true commercial use. It might be an ancillary service of the building. Um, I mean, we see this in utilities through sub-metering where the apartment owner needs to pass on the electric bill to their tenants, um, where there was some form of regulation, but maybe it's not as tough. And so that was where we were saying, look, maybe they should be, if the customer, or I'd say the end user, does not have the ability to pay to get the charger fixed themselves, and we would make that a little more firm. But in terms of talking about this as a broad idea, that they would fall into this framework somehow, but maybe the level of enforcement there would be different. And that's where Michael Krauthammer also weighed in and said, look, great idea, but also that might be hard to enforce. So think about how, and or operate your state agencies to do that. So before you pull the trigger on that idea, just think about it a little harder. But
Yeah,
that's where the kind of group is coalescing.
yeah, that's what I thought, and that makes sense to me. When it comes to sub-metering, it might be a lot harder to kind of track down the electrons to make sure they're being appropriately charged, but at least we're having that conversation.
Yeah. Awesome.
Ben, can I
Thank
follow
you.
up my earlier comment with one additional thought, please?
Yes, of course.
Thanks, Michael Krauthammer again. In addition to it's also, I think, not too early to mention this idea that simply offering a charger for the purpose of like making money is not only difficult to define, but even to the extent most chargers out there are offered like in commerce, and exposing themselves to a set of regulations which exists for a lot of other devices, which in the economy are subject to the Office of Weights, Department of Weights and Measures. I think it's important for everybody here to recognize and keep in mind a point that was alluded to very early on in this work group, which is that the vast majority of chargers make little to no actual profit, like as profit is defined, financially speaking. There are extensive costs to installing and operating EV chargers, and revenue, let alone profits, is for the most part extremely low on the vast majority of chargers out there. To the extent Maryland imposes too much cost or regulatory burden on chargers, I do fear the result will be, either mass non-compliance and or a migration of EV chargers from Maryland and a halt to new installations. I'll just pause there.
Right.
And
No,
thank you again. Thank you again,
no,
Ben.
thank you for that. No, yeah, thank you for that reminder, Michael. And that's something I think we will have to have a serious conversation around when we're discussing the enforcement side of this, but also who's subject to it will have some implications as well. But yes, I think that was the two when we were talking guiding principles at the beginning of this. Chargers operate as advertised, also want to still attract chargers to the state. And whatever we come up with, we want to balance those two interests. Awesome. All right. Other thoughts on who should be subject before I move on to the next topic? All right.
And Ben,
Go ahead, Brett.
I know Delegate Frazier August has his hand raised. Just unsure if he has a follow-up comment
Go ahead,
or if
Delegate.
that was from before.
My fault. I lowered my hand. Sorry.
Oh, perfect.
Awesome.
no
Thank you.
problem.
No worries.
Back to you, Ben.
My arm was getting really, really tired. So thank you for reminding me to.
Excellent. All right. So I will get that summarized. We'll get that circulated to the group, and everyone sit on that idea, think about the pros and cons of it and how you might refine it for the next meeting. All right. Next one, registering qualified EV charging stations. So this is basically once, if this is passed, we will have to have a process for bringing, for identifying these stations and getting them under the framework and making sure that those who should be subject to the rules know about the rules. In my view, this is one of the areas where we would, in the report, say this is something that should be done, but ultimately the implementing agency should be giving flexibility on how they identify and bring people under the hood of it. But one thing I think would be helpful for the group to discuss is for existing stations, how I guess what, and this actually falls under one of the charges to us, because is how much grace period, how much time would we give an existing charger to, I guess, one, identify themselves to the implementing state agency, and two, to come under compliance with the rules. I would say that second one is something that's going to be a little harder for us, I think, to pen down. But that first one might be something that we can all talk through a little more. So I'll open that up for the members to weigh in on, which is one, I think we would leave a little bit of more wiggle room for the implementing agency on this issue, but two, how much time do you think, or I guess any ideas on how we would identify them and or how much time grace period we would give? And if members would like to hear from the business community in terms of those who've had to deal with this in, let's say, California, I can also open the floor to them.
And Ben, I did
Brett.
just want to let you know.
Go ahead, Brett.
And Senator Heddle, feel free to unmute there. I think Ben may have gotten disconnected.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering if it was me or if something else happened. But I think it would be helpful to hear from any folks in the private sector or elsewhere who have experienced this in other states.
I agree. Otherwise, we're going to be kind of shooting in the dark.
And this is Ben, I'm back. So go ahead, yes. Brett, call on any members of the EVSE community that have raised their hand on this issue.
And Senator Heddleman, apologies for that. If you could repeat your question, it seems like Ben is back here. So.
No, I was just following up. I think it would be helpful to hear from folks in the private sector who've gone through this in other states, if they could share their experience with us. I think that would be helpful. Did you hear me or no?
Yep.
Senator, are you asking for experience with the registration of EVSE with a permitting agency?
Yes. And also what was the grace period for compliance?
I think that is there something wrong with, like, things are getting very broken up. I'm hearing conversation, and then conversation is obviously being lost, and I don't know whether that's on me, on other people.
I'm hearing Senator Heddleman. This is Michael Krauthammer here.
I heard her twice now, yeah, but
Okay.
I haven't. Okay.
I'd be happy to respond, but again, I'll wait my turn until members of the committee speak.
I'd like to ask a question. When you have new gas stations come online for weights and measures, what do you currently have as a reasonable time for them to register? I mean, that may be the yardstick that we want to use. Not sure, but that's at least a starting point.
Yeah, but Paul, I think we're talking about existing stations. So the charging fleet that's already in the ground, how are we going to kind of ramp up the framework? And I'll just throw a hypothesis out there just to get the discussion started. Just an idea. I mean, you would think that, I mean, first of all, we're going to have some sort of baseline measurement of performance. So you would think over 6 months or something, you would, or a year, you know, some time, you would gather data on reliability and what does that mean? And so do you get feedback from PlugShare or whatever, and or the you know, the network providers? So then you've got a baseline, and then you can start to then once the charging providers know that what, you know, how they're being measured, then they can decide whether to take action. And then if there's some sort of chronic problem, then you would imagine that you would let them know, hey, there's a chronic problem on your charger, and then you start, you know, you use the carrots and then later the sticks. But that, so first of all, basically you just get a baseline picture of what's reliable, what's not, and then you can focus on the unreliable ones. So that would be my theory.
Okay, well, I was coming at it from another direction, and that is, well, we know where all the chargers are for utilities, and that could be done relatively easily. You've got the VW settlement, all that stuff is currently in the pipe. All those chargers could be readily identified. So the question is, what beyond those would be needed to be identified, and what sort of a grace period would there be for those?
Michael Crowdby, I'm not sure if anyone's calling on folks or if this is a good opportunity to respond to these comments as well as to Senator Hedelman's. So just sort of by way of background here, you know, when you think about the DC fast chargers, as was just mentioned, those locations are known and easily identifiable, and for the most part, if not completely, owned by sophisticated companies, you know, either utilities or one of the major network operators like Tesla, EVgo, or Electrify America. So those are very easy to find and to contact, and those folks understand everything that we're talking about here. And also those stations are very expensive to install, so there's significant resources committed to ensuring compliance with all necessary laws and regulations in each of the different states. With regard to level 2 chargers, Senator Hedelman and others on the committee, those are completely different. They, just by order of magnitude, a DC fast charging installation might cost somewhere in the area of, you know, $250,000 to $500,000. A level 2 charger costs maybe $5,000 to $7,000. The DC fast chargers are installed by companies with significant market caps that operate nationally. Level 2 chargers are deployed by office building landlords, shopping centers, and apartment buildings as amenities that they typically see as comparable to vending machines, like, i.e., they don't really pay a lot of attention to them. They are typically purchased through the company's websites or on Amazon. They're installed by electricians or a handyman. They don't require any special knowledge or certification to install. Anyone with a little bit of electrical knowledge can install a level 2 charger. This is all sort of a roundabout way of saying that these folks are not accustomed to and likely not anticipating having to comply with really anything. So to the extent you start to, and also, well, I'll just pause there on that aspect of my statement. So to the extent you start reaching out to landlords about registering their EV chargers, like you may be difficult to even the person at the company who's aware of the chargers. They likely will have little knowledge about the level 2 chargers. It may have been a predecessor who installed them. They may or may not know which network operator they're on. They will not know serial numbers. They will be quite taken aback at the idea that they're going to have to be paying annual fees. Very surprised that they're going to have chargers inspected. And this is all going to come as a great shock. In terms of going to the network operator, the network operators have no expectation either of managing the day-to-day operations of chargers. They're cloud network providers that handle payment and authentication of credentials, maybe a little bit of monitoring on the chargers, but it's generally speaking relatively passive. Someone could unplug a charger, move it to another location, including across the country, plug it back in, and the charger network operator, the cloud operator, may or may not even know where the chargers are. So again, like more evidence of the challenge that you're going to have here in seeking to implement much of a regulatory regime. Thank you.
This is Paul again. I think you make some good points, and I think we maybe should bifurcate our approach, put the most emphasis on level 3s, DC fast chargers, and take a possibly different approach for level 2s. That's kind of a suggestion. I don't know whether people are interested in going in that direction, but level 2s are a different breedy cat than DC fast chargers.
Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just had a question. Do we have a breakdown of data on how many we have of each? Does somebody have that?
I
Yes,
thought that MEA might have that.
MDOT does. It's on the EV dashboard for the state, I believe.
Yeah, I can send the link to this dashboard that we maintain. I do believe that the data on here reflects publicly available charging stations, not let's say the semi-public that I was talking about. If we consider common MUD charging as semi-public, but let me send the link in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Amanda, for sending that in the chat. Sorry, Scott, you can go ahead.
Yeah, for the DC fleet, yes, it's probably going to be easier to ramp this up because they understand, reliability. They're dealing with it more, and yes, for MUDs. I mean, MUDs are going to be this kind of hybrid creature because semi-public. That's a good way to put it because it's public within the community of the MUD, and there just has to be for like a store owner who just has a level 2 out in front. That could be enforcement in form of just a letter. We've been getting complaints, or your charger, is just so that they know that someone is looking, someone is noticing, and the customers, the EV community is noticing, obviously, and they so they're giving feedback. But you know, if something's chronic, then the feedback isn't getting through. Now, that's not to say that, you know, we have masses of non-working level 2 chargers, but for the ones that are, there should be some sort of way to let the owner know, and at first in a benign, friendly, helpful way, that you know, your charger's not working very well. But for the DC fleet, it's this is not going to be a terribly hard issue to ramp up, is especially if you know, Weights and Measures is inspecting them and the owners know that they're now being inspected. And this could go on for like a year. We could get a baseline measurement over the course of a year. That would be pretty generous. You can get a lot of baseline information right now from PlugShare, I would imagine. But I mean, so what Paul said is true. We do have a lot of information about chronic unreliability now.
This
Yeah,
is Ben. I'm back. Just want to let everyone know that. But we just wanted to weigh in real quick, or maybe Mike, just to check with Michael, because I caught the last half of his statement, was because Weights and Measures is already going to have to enforce this something for all commercial available charging stations. So Michael, were your statements regarding level 2s just randomly moving across this country discussing and network operators not knowing that they need to be subject to this stuff, was that inclusive of all the commercial things that are seeking to make money, or was it inclusive of only those who are probably private use, but they might fall under a broader framework that was being discussed earlier?
Ben, I would say that, I mean, it's hard to make super broad generalizations, obviously, but for the most part, folks are not really like making a lot of money on level 2 chargers. I would say that broadly speaking, you know, they are offered as an amenity by landlords who are trying to, you know, do something good for their customers and, you know, for the community and the planet. You just can't make a lot of money on a level 2 charger. They're just, the economics just don't really work out all that great unless the utilization is extraordinarily high, which is not the case for most level 2 chargers. I would say that it's hard to speak on behalf of, like, you know, all of my, you know, clients' members, obviously. So this is going to be a little bit of Michael Krauthammer speaking as someone who's been in the business for 12 years, installing and operating chargers and also advising landlords. If you call up the shopping center landlord and tell them that the charger is not working and they're out of compliance and they need to spend much, if any, money fixing it, the result you're probably going to get is they're going to remove the charger. And they're probably not going to replace it with another one. They're probably just going to take it away because
Right.
it's not
No,
making
I've
money
heard.
for them. Yeah.
Right. Now I've heard that, and I mean, that's one of my fears with this, the parent, when we're trying to figure out how to do this. But I think I also recognize that Weights and Measures, and maybe this is a good question for Weights and Measures, for that kind of a setup where it's at a shopping center, would have the ability, like that individual, that shopping center would have to comply with Weights and Measures regardless of what this group comes up with. So, and maybe, I don't know if you have experience with California, but is this happening in California? Do you know if there's any EVSEs that have experience in California? Yeah.
California is very much a patchwork of regulatory regimes. Weights and Measures, as I understand, and I'm not an expert on the California market, but as I understand, different counties are taking different approaches, and there are some where it's very strict, and what we're seeing is like lots of non-compliance, you know, and then the other counties that are more hands-off. My recommendation, and I have been involved in Weights and Measures, broadly speaking, for a very long time, My recommendation to the Maryland Department of Agriculture is to, and again, I'm just going to say this is like Michael's recommendation, informed by the industry, but again, my clients may or may not agree with this view, that the Office of Weights and Measures, the Department of Weights and Measures does have the ability to modify the way Maryland adopts Handbook 44. And one option is to have a broader bandwidth or margin of error for level 2 chargers, such that chargers don't fall into non-compliance. And that may be one way of avoiding this problem. It's sort of these chargers are dispensing very few kilowatt hours per hour, and they're not charging a lot of money for them. And so, to the extent they're not accurate or out of spec, it's a de minimis amount of money that's either being over or undercharged. And I have been giving this a lot of thought since our last meeting here, and I kind of am analogizing it a little bit to when you go to a restaurant and you order a soft drink or a beer, and you expect a 12 ounces, and maybe it's a little bit more, maybe it's a little bit less. Like, that's sort of the level of error I feel like we're talking about with level 2 chargers. And so I'll just pause there. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, everyone, for letting me interject there. Paul, I know I cut you off, so my apologies. Is there something else you wanted to say?
No, I'm good. I'm kind of picking up on what Michael is saying. I think we will want to, or at least I hope so, deal differently with level 2s and level 3s, precisely for some of the reasons that Michael has brought up. You don't want to be ham-handed.
All right.
Yeah, this is Scott. I would agree with Paul. Within the framework can allow for different responses for the different sectors. So I would, like Michael gave an example of going to the shopping center owner, and I would get just a simple notification from the state or something. I would go right up to the part where it's, and you have to spend money to fix it. And I would start with just a simple notification. We've been getting a lot of complaints, and just letting them know. And then later, and it could be much later or never in principle, and you have to spend money to fix it. So, but that's still within the framework, but a different response than you would give to a DC charger.
Got it. Thank you. Others?
So this is Shelley. So I totally understand that. My question is, though, in that, as opposed to going to a restaurant and getting, they ran out of large cups for soda, and you can only get a small cup, like, that is not going to substantially change the consumer's experience. And if you do go to a shopping center because your app tells you that that there's a charger there, and it's not functioning, or then that does have a much more dramatic impact on someone's experience. And so I totally understand what you're saying about the cost benefit to the landlord and other level 2 charging, other people that provide level 2 chargers. But again, if we're trying to kind of keep the consumer's experience front and center, then that does have quite, potentially quite a much more, a much larger impact on their experience.
Got it. So basically, basically that balancing of the consumer.
Right. I mean, I totally understand the cost, and I understand the differences between, the level 2s and the DC folks, but the DC Fastport folks. But And I don't want to drive those level 2 folks, out of the marketplace. At the same time, I do think if you're going to do this, there has to be some accountability for it. And and that means maintenance. So I just, want to center that again.
Can I jump in?
Of course, go ahead.
So to Senator Hellman's point, I guess what I'm thinking is if you're in an EV and you're on some kind of extended day trip or a road trip and there are no level 3, there are no DC fast chargers or anything around, but there does happen to be, a level 2 charger at a restaurant or something. And you're like, you know what? I'm running really low. I know I'm not going to get a lot. I might get, 20 miles, 15 miles, maybe 30, depending on, exactly what is there. So I'm going to go to that restaurant. It's a couple miles out of my way, but I don't have a choice now, and I'm going to slow eat at that restaurant, and I'm going to walk out of here with 40 miles, which is going to get me to my next place where there is a DC fast charger. But if that's out of order completely, and you don't know it because it's listed on an app that's saying it is in working order, and then you drive 5 miles out of your way, and that's the only thing around, then that could prove to be very, very challenging for somebody. Now they've driven 5 miles out of their way. Yeah, they can have dinner, but they can't get any electrons and they're kind of screwed. So I agree with what everybody is saying as well, that, it's going to be very, very hard, I think, because a lot of them are free. Like, the Giant near my house, you just go and people plug in, they go in for half an hour, 45 minutes, go shopping and come out. So is there a way to have like a different category? So if you're level 2, it just needs to be up and running and working, but you don't necessarily have to be able to test that the people are being charged properly or for electrons being used. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. Well, my bias is obviously the other. I want to make sure you're being charged. I mean, I want it to work, but I feel like it would be more detrimental if somebody felt like they're being defrauded out of what they did charge. So yeah, no, I think it's something we need to balance. I guess, would it be helpful? What I'm wondering, is because we need to keep noodling on this, and I think some of this is also going to come back up in the enforcement section anyway, because I think a lot of this is tied to the enforcement discussion. Is it something that'd be helpful if you all wrote down questions and I circulated them to all the EVS? Like, we have a number of EVSE interest in what this group comes up with. We have probably 6 to 10 companies paying attention. Michael's is obviously one of them, his trade association. Is it something where you would all benefit from them all sending us in writing thoughts on this subject that you could
Yeah.
pick through? And in the next meeting, we just have a nice like 20-minute free for all questioning of them based off what
Yeah,
they gave us.
I think that would be good. The other question I have is to earlier in the conversation, how do other states tackle this exact issue?
Yeah, and I think ChargePoint was discussing with me having a presentation maybe on the California market. So I can round up the EVSCs and see if they can give kind of a discussion of other markets, probably focus on California because that's where I think this is the furthest along. The 2 markets we've identified as being models would be one, California, or the other would be actually Great Britain. California does an incentive-based model where if the state gives you money, you're subject to a framework very similar to NEVI. And I think that's what Michael is just part of what Michael is discussing. And then versus Great Britain framework is everyone in the country is subject to certain requirements and it's more punitive. I don't know if it's how well it's working or relative to California's model, but those were kind of 2 main models that when we were looking at it early on were both possible frameworks. One's more based off of my hook for regulating you is did the state give you money versus the other one's hook is if you're operating in general, I have enforcement authority over you.
You may
And
want to
so
look into
that's
Colorado and New Jersey as they're also doing the incentive model.
okay. Colorado and New Jersey.
That's right. Yeah, they have a 97% uptime if you're receiving funds from their program.
We'll do look into them. And who is this speaking? Thanks.
This is Diego from MEA.
Thank you, Diego. Sorry, I just didn't recognize your voice.
This is Paul again. I come across, particularly at shopping centers and other places, chargers where there's no charge, basically. And I guess where I'm coming from on that there should be a carve out. If people are providing it for free, they're just using it as an amenity. They, in my opinion, shouldn't be subject to this. You know, they're doing it on their own. They're not getting any recompense from it other than saying, well, I want to attract people. And basically that may be enough to incentivize them to keep them going. So it's a thought anyway.
I'll put that under the it's under the eligibility section, and so when it gets circulated, we can discuss if that's an exception or not.
Thank you.
Welcome. All right, so we'll put a pin in that, but that will be, we'll have that part of the next meeting in terms of bigger questions for the EVSE. The next subject is data reporting and tracking. And Brett, go ahead and share your screen. I don't know that we need to look at it, but I think part of what kicked me out of the meeting is that my bandwidth failed.
Yep, absolutely. Do you want me to go back to the work group or the workbook, Ben?
Yes, go ahead. It's the framework tab. It's row 27. So anyways, data reporting and tracking is another part of the framework that we would be discussing. I guess what I would put forward for the members is this is something where I guess I'd like to hear all to weigh in on what you would like to see, but in general, I would argue this should be left up for the implementing agency in terms of how much data reporting they think they need to appropriately monitor the market while also balancing not overwhelming the market with onerous data reporting. So I'll let you all weigh in real quick, or everyone go ahead and weigh in on things you would like to see in terms of data reporting. We can then give that out to the EVSE community to weigh in on their thoughts there. But this is one of, and I'd also like to hear from you if you all think this might be one area where we really, the report would recommend that's left up for the implementing agency. I'll first with the senator and delegates.
And Ben, real quick, just wanted to check with the
Yeah.
parties if everyone's able to see my screen. Okay, I'm on row 27.
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, they already have to do regular data reporting, right, for NEVI. I think
Those
it's
subject to the NEVI framework, yes.
right.
So the two sectors within Maryland who currently have some form of data reporting are those who are receiving NEVI funds and utility stations. I'm not aware of anyone else who has to do reporting today.
Right. I guess I would want to look, I'd want to see what other models are and yeah, have further discussions. I don't think I'm prepared to weigh in at the moment.
Other members?
Yeah, this is Paul. I hear what you're saying about leaving it up to the implementing agency, but I think we might want to set some minimums that we think are relevant. I mean, reliability is the biggie, in my opinion. So something to think about anyway.
Now, Paul, when you say reliability, is this sort of saying I did my math on my uptime and here's the uptime proposed? Like I guess Because I think that'd be good for us all. Sort of like, what would you think as bare minimums? Do you have any ideas of bare minimums for everyone to take back?
Well, I mean,
Sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm with the 97%, and to me, that's a figment of some people's imagination because it's being reported through software. And the continuing issue is when people like my friend Lanny go out and check and they find out, yeah, it's shown as it's up, but it's not really up because I can't access it. And I understand that there are standards that are being developed today that would be used by all the charging systems. Right now, we have different systems, and that's adding to the confusion and adding to the frustration, in my opinion. So, Scott, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would. I would be curious to know, and I have my own opinion. So the reporting, so the reliability data reported to Weights and Measures, for example, that they take, would that be public? Would it be publicly accessible? And then the corollary question to that is, well, do we have that for gas stations now? And I don't know. So, but it's not really such an issue for gas stations because they have a lot more redundancy. But I'm just thinking if there's a station, I mean, I'm always looking at it from the driver's point of view. So if there's a station that's chronically down, not working, could a consumer advocate, for example, go to the state where the reliability data is being reported and view what's being told to the state essentially? And my personal opinion is, yeah, we should make it public or a subset of the data. I mean, you take out anything that's proprietary but just kind of summary data. I think that should be public. So that's just my opinion.
Thanks, Scott. Rachel or Allison with Agriculture, what do you all provide? What all is made available to the public today regarding gas stations? Or maybe if you know what you were planning to do for EVSE stuff under Handbook 44.
I would consider it the same exact reporting system as gas stations. We don't report on reliability. Instead, what we do is we test and inspect devices such as gas pumps or EV chargers per the specifications, tolerances, and user requirements as set forth in Handbook 44. Then, depending upon each, well, in this case, it would be charger status. The device would either be approved and receive a approval seal as we were last there, or it would be in a state of condemnation until properly repaired and returned to service. We do track our results of each inspection. However, it's not just open for the general public to, say, view on the internet. Instead, if the general public has a specific concern about a specific site or location, they have the ability to submit a public information request, and depending upon what they request, once it's approved through our public information officer, they'll receive the information that was requested. But we don't report on reliability. We're a little bit different. We just specifically report on specifications such, in this example, does it have an indicator? Is the charger actually working? Is the port that you hook into the car, is that working? And kind of the same with gas pumps. Also, is it within the tolerance values is laid out in Handbook 44? So we do investigate consumer complaints. So if a consumer did contact our department and state that they were having an issue at a particular location, we would conduct an investigation. Depending upon what we find, if it's validated, that charger would be removed from service until properly repaired. In Maryland law, it is required that the device owner maintains their device. Doesn't matter whether it's a scale, a gas pump, or in the future an EV charger. They're required by Maryland law as the device owner to maintain that device in proper working order. I hope that helps some.
It does. Is your I guess so? It sounds like you don't have anything. Like, let's say like somebody wanted to look up the gas station next to my house. They wouldn't be able to find anything publicly available online. They would have to PIA you, and then your team would turn out the date. It doesn't sound like this data is really redacted. You just don't make it available until requested.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Yes, that would be
Okay.
correct.
So that's what you do today.
Yes, when you think about it, if you have a gas station, let's say competing gas stations across the street, and the gas station owners, they may look at each other's data, they may look at each other's reports. Either way, it would become a conflict of interest to make all that information readily available to anyone at any point in time. But if specific information is submitted, through a PIA, then we'll definitely provide what we have, and what we track is the actual inspection data. So we don't track reliability. Instead, we would track, is, like I stated, is the charger working as designed? Is it within the tolerance values as laid out in NIST Handbook 44? And those are things that we would track.
Got it. Thank you, Allison. Scott, did that answer your question on the gas stations?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So you would do the inspection on the station, and if it was just not working, then you couldn't determine the other measurements. So then it would be kind of a de facto reliability issue. I mean, if you want to determine the other elements and make sure that it's dispensing properly, it would have to be working. So it's kind of a backdoor way of getting at reliability.
So yes, it's required to actually be working. Instead, if we go to, let's say, a gas pump and it's out of service, or in this case, a charger, especially with the chargers, it would automatically be condemned. You can't verify or test anything that's not working. Therefore, it's not in compliance.
Okay. I mean, that sounds acceptable to me. Yeah. So then for a site with chronic problems, then you could use a PIA and go from there. So it wouldn't just be open for everything, but you would just find the problem stations and then pursue those. That sounds fine to me.
So we don't particularly pursue problem stations unless there's a consumer complaint. Instead, what we do is we aim to inspect all devices once every 2 to 3 years, depending upon availability of test equipment and staffing. Currently in the state of Maryland, we have over 66,000 registered devices, and we have PINs for 18 inspectors. Inspections can be quite lengthy depending upon what type of device it is, the standard that's used, and the amount of labor that's put into following the specific evaluation procedure outlines. So that's why it's required for device owners to maintain their devices in proper working order.
Well, when I said pursue the stations, I meant by the users, not by weights and measures. So
I see.
By like the public, basically.
So ideally, if we increased a few pins in the future, then hopefully we can aim to get to every EV charger within a reasonable amount of time, just as our other devices. There's no specific timeline set in Maryland statute currently that requires devices to be inspected within a specific time parameter, just that device owners maintain their device properly.
Allison, you just you just mentioned that it is the responsibility of the owner of the device to maintain it. And
That's correct.
In any of the regulatory system, are there consequences for not maintaining it, or what happens then?
So we do have the ability to assess civil penalties. Typically, civil penalties are not assessed unless we can prove facilitation of fraud or intent. But we do have the ability to assess civil penalties. The first civil penalty starts at $500, and they can increase to a second civil penalty at $1,000, and then go up to $2,000 per offense. Currently, that's what's written in statute.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Allison, though, on that, you've also talked about condemning stations. So what is the, when you distinguish between the two? Like when you say condemn, it's basically like you basically say it's out of service. You can't serve anyone in the public. So what's
That's
the
correct.
distinction there?
It really wouldn't be the station. We would condemn the actual charger. You wouldn't condemn a whole station because that would be a burden on not only the consumer who's looking to use their station, but also the device owner who's, trying to make a profit to some extent. So just like with gas pumps or scales, if we go to a grocery store and there's a scale out of tolerance and that it needs to be condemned, we condemn that one scale. The same as a gas pump. If we go to the gas pump, we would condemn one side of the gas pump. The same thing would be with the charger. We would condemn that specific charger, but not the whole station. But the way we condemn things right now is we have sealing wire that we would actually seal. Currently, we seal the platter to the scale so it can't be used, or we seal the actual nozzle to the dispenser so it cannot be lifted by the consumer. There's a yellow condemn tag or a red stop use tag. There are two different levels of enforcement action that we have within the state of Maryland. And we run our sealing wire through it and seal it in a way that the consumer cannot conduct the transaction, place the tag on it with all of our information that states that this device has been removed from service, as well as our phone number. And then we have metal seals that seal the actual sealing wire. And that's currently one of the ways that we condemn or stop use on a device. And
Got
that's
it.
a lot of information.
Yep.
Hey, good evening,
All
folks.
right.
This is Senator Ron Watson. Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Senator, and welcome to the group.
Hey, thank you very much. Just for clarification, I know we're talking about data and metrics, and a portion of that, of course, will be used to ensure, efficient operation and are systemic in nature. But those who have experience in implementing this in other states, what core set of metrics is provided to, say, members of the General Assembly for efficient oversight and to be able to look at whether or not we need to adjust some laws or whatever to make things a little bit better?
EVSE is on the line if you want to speak to any of the frameworks you think are relevant.
Unless you're going to cover it in a different section. But my take is any data or metrics captured is for the sole purpose of fact-based, data-driven, informed decision-making. And if the General Assembly is putting this framework in place via legislation, there's got to be some subset of the data, not so operational in nature, but some subset that allows us to ensure, we're moving in the right way.
Right. So, Senator, while we wait see if there's any EVSE, it's just what we do know. In Maryland, the two sets of data that we get reported today are one from utility-owned charging stations to the Public Service Commission, and the second is through NEVI. So any charging station that is receiving federal funds through a certain program that's administered by our MDOT, they also get data reporting, and that framework is the one that we are considering, or for the legislation that was passed this year, would be considered as the model that we should look at. I would say the state that is furthest along in terms of data reporting, in terms of thinking about this and how to do it, and I would love to hear from the EVSEs on terms of how that has been going, is California. It sounds like Colorado and New Jersey might also be there. So if anyone from those states wants to weigh in, they can also. But California's CEC, where anytime California gives out money, there's those charging stations are subject to their uptime framework and also subject to data reporting. So those are the ones that I'm aware of and that we've been looking into. And we can get you more information on the California one, but I think, yeah, we weren't going to really cover it again today, but it seems like something that I might be bringing the EVSEs in next meeting to discuss more in depth.
All right, appreciate that.
Yeah. Brett, did any of the EVSEs raise their hand or wanted to speak up?
Ben, is Michael Krauthammer here. I can say a bit about this.
Go for it.
Thank you. Yes, Senator Watson, it's an excellent question. It's separate from California, which is sort of a whole nother complicated ecosystem of regulation and industry. I can say Oklahoma is regulating their DC fast chargers for purposes of collecting taxes on the sale of electricity, which also is imposing a burden on the few chargers that are in that state. I don't have a definitive list of every other jurisdiction. I think such a list would be extremely short, and I think the short answer to your question, Senator Watson, is that there's been very little in the way of regulatory requirements other than what Ben described. This is the topics we're talking about here on this call, whether it's regard to reliability or meter accuracy or potential taxes. This is borderline matter of first impression. I think we would be very challenged to find much in the way of guidance from other states. And the reason for that is simply that it's just such a new industry and it's growing. There are new entrants coming in, but the additional, I think there's been, I don't know, I can't explain why exactly. I think the number of chargers is relatively small, and I would expect that the concerns that I've expressed earlier in the call about the burden on the industry may be recognized in other places also, and the idea that we don't want to impose too much on an industry that makes very little money and is still in such early phases. The last thing I'd say is this is for the group to remember these different perspectives, whether it's consumer protection from a meter accuracy perspective, reliability from the perspective of going to find a charger that is working or not, or tax collection. And those all have very different drivers behind them, of course.
Thank you, Michael. Other statements about data collection? All right. Going down to, all right, enforcement. So for enforcement, we've been really, I would say, touching on this issue through all of our conversations, and I think you hear a lot when Michael speaks up about the margins in this industry. And so it's kind of and also when Scott's talking about, well, maybe some people just get a warning letter while others might have to face the music in a different way. And so I think here what we should probably suss out is what are the different matrices for enforcement and what may or may not make sense. And I think, I don't know if this group within the time that we have can come down decisively on anything, but let's make sure we have the options out there and you all can come back in the next meeting and hopefully kind of put your foot down on where you think we should be going. So I would say for enforcement, really the models that we are aware of are, I guess let's take our state to start with. The two regulated industries right now for charging stations are one, the utilities, where the PSC has rate regulatory authority over the utilities and their equipment and can force them to fix it and or take other actions such as disallowing cost recovery. Then there's NEVI, and Amanda, you can speak more to this, NEVI, and this would also be, I would say, a model that is probably similar across the United States for those who are doing this kind of enforcement, is where where there's an incentive being given to the charging station to build, whether it be that the extension cost has been covered or some sort of funds have been given to that station. And in exchange for that, that charging station has agreed to provide a certain amount of reliability uptime. That's basically the NEVI framework. That's the 97% uptime discussion that you're hearing a lot about. My understanding, and those operating in California, please speak up, that's also the California model. It's if you received funds, then this framework came, then you fell under the framework. But there is a discussion here about opening this up to a wider group of charging stations who would not traditionally have fallen under such a framework. The closest one that when we were doing some background research earlier this year, we found Great Britain was a model if parties wanted to consider having a broad framework that was punitive, even if you were receiving no incentive cost. And I know we've all been talking about different hierarchies today in terms of how we enforce, so we should document those up. But in conclusion, there are a couple models out there, but most of them are tied to this idea that the framework only applies to those who are receiving funds. I would say the one exception is where Handbook 44 comes in, and you've heard Allison discuss their ability to either condemn stations where they have near accuracy or other concerns that fall under Handbook 44, or they could, in certain situations, impose civil penalties. So I'll stop there and open up the floor. Questions, thoughts about this? I would say a proposed strawman for the group to take back is this hierarchy approach of DC fast charging stations might have a more strict enforcement versus level 2s, or other use cases might be more in simply the warning or public shaming category of enforcement. And Brett, this is row 40 and below. So work group members, go ahead and speak up if you have questions for the EVSE industry. Also put it out there.
So, if I may, in Handbook 44, there are different tolerance values for AC and DC chargers, and that's how we separate. We don't really separate by level 2 or level 3. We separate by AC and DC chargers. Currently, AC chargers have a tolerance and acceptance tolerance of 1%. Maintenance tolerance is 2%. It's slightly different for the EV chargers. We do have a new proposal that was voted and will go into the handbook on January 1st of this year. So for a DC system that was placed in service prior to January 1st, 2025, that is marked class 5, acceptance and maintenance tolerances are 5%. So that is the exception. They have a wider spread. Anything after placed in service after January 1st of 2025 will be subject to acceptance tolerance of 1% and maintenance tolerance of 2% at this time. So I hope that helps with some of the tolerance questions. I heard tolerance questions earlier. And when we're talking accuracy, we're talking kilowatts because it's sold by kilowatt. And that's weights and measures. If anyone has any questions related to that.
Thank you, Allison. Other members?
I don't see any hands raised in the chat or anything as well, Ben.
Okay. All right, so I think we're going to have some presentations next time from the EVSE industry about other states, and I will reach out to them to discuss that. I will have them discuss enforcement both relating to Handbook 44 and these other models. I think our proposed straw man on the ground right now is different levels of enforcement based off of type, and we'll have to have that discussion. And then we will have to probably have to discuss what if there's any sort of I guess monetary versus other forms of verbal or written enforcement on these areas. Are there any specific questions members might have for the EVSE community that I could bring back in the next meeting on enforcement?
This is Paul. We've been talking about volumetric measuring, and yet I do see some EVSEs out there that charge by the hour. I don't know how prevalent that is in Maryland, but it is out there.
So like everything, everything has what's called a correct method of sale, whether it's gasoline, whether it's vegetables at the grocery store, firewood, sod, pretty much anything has a correct method of sale. The correct method of sale for charging your electric vehicles by kilowatt hour. It's not by hourly. Additionally, you can add additional charges such as like a surcharge to use that particular charger. You would have the ability to add like a parking space charge for once the charge has ended. If your vehicle continues to sit in that specific spot, they would be additional charges, but the proper method of sale would be kilowatt hour.
Allison, when you say proper method of sale, is that, if so, to Paul's point, let's say there's somebody who decided to engage in a billing method where they're like, I'm just going to charge you on your hours of plug-in. I'm not going to charge you based off the amount of kilowatt hours consumed by the vehicle. Would that charging station be out of compliance with you all, or would you all say that's fine?
That would be a compliance issue because that's not the correct method of sale. It's kind of like, I'll give you an example, propane. Everyone's familiar with filling a 20-pound cylinder. The correct method of sale for filling a 20-pound cylinder, say for your gas grill or any propane sale, because it's a liquid fuel, is either by volume or by weight. Some places we come across and they're charging, say, $20 to fill a 20-pound cylinder, a flat rate. That's the incorrect method of sale, and they would be cited on that and expected to sell the commodity correctly.
Got it. Thank you. Other questions?
This is Amanda from MDOT. I think I'd just like to clarify that what's on the screen right now from MDOT is that enforcement should be punitive in terms of in the form of penalties and or fees, and this is more so from the NEVI perspective, where we're providing funds, and we would then withhold funds if chargers are not performing up to expectation. I guess I would clarify that this approach might be would disincentivize charging companies from sort of operating chargers in the first place if they will be penalized this heavily. So I'm wondering, I guess I'd be interested in hearing more from EVSE next meeting about perhaps what they would propose. Yeah, I think that's it for now.
Thanks, Amanda. I'll pass it along. So hear from the industry themselves in terms of how they would, if you told them I'm going to put these rules on you either way, then what do they view as beneficial enforcement?
Right, and I think wondering if there's a middle ground to also making sure that that chargers aren't just, I mean, I think that the concern, right, is that we don't want chargers just to be abandoned if they can't meet uptime. So wondering if we can find a middle ground on that.
Got it. Thank you. All right. All right. Moving on. All right, so I'm going to move into the budget discussion since we are starting to get towards the end of the meeting. I wanted to make time for this. And also, I think we're pretty close to being done with the framework discussion. Because the next issue was the business unit administrative needs on row 44, Brett. State agencies. One of the tasks of this group is to determine if such a law is put into place to regulate, to do some form of regulation over this industry. Who should be doing it? One of the natural places is obviously Maryland Department of Agriculture for Handbook 44, which does have a lot of crossover with this reliability discussion we've been having. It could also be the PSC in terms of its oversight of utility charging stations and having to already implement some of this. MDOT's also a natural place, also because of its NEVI setup and the fact that NEVI is supposed to be the guiding light for this group. And then we also know MEA is in charge of state funds, and if you look at other states, their versions of MEAs have been the ones that have been put in charge of enforcing these areas. And then, yeah, so I think those are, and the comptroller's office has control of taxes, and so therefore they would have to interact with these stations either way. So I guess, so one of those key things that are going to the legislature is going to be, great, if I do pass this law, what's the budget? What's the bill? And so over the next month, I would like each state agency to go back and figure out, okay, if I was told to do this, what would I tell the legislature I need in terms of funds to do this work? What's the number of, what I think might be a ballpark number of bodies? What's my fund? Thinking about equipment and all that good jazz. So for you all, I guess why I wanted to open up the floor today is, what are some things you think you don't know that you would like to know to help you come up with a budget? So that either so that we can maybe start pooling resources across the groups to think through these questions. And also, once again, we have EVSEs who are interested in this, who've done it in other states. They might be able to point us at certain resources. So I'll stop there, open up the floor. Is there anything that any of the state agencies would like to know that you think you would have a hard time figuring out, that we can put out into the ether to start figuring out common answers to these questions? I know for myself, this would be, what kind of equipment would I need to do this work? I know MDA has provided the kind of equipment they need cost somewhere around $100,000. I think, what I think, Allison, what is it's $100,000 for the equipment that's used to test the stations to make sure that
That would
they're
just be
accurately
per
working.
standard. Yeah, that would be per
Sorry?
standard. That would be per standard. The standards are very expensive, so the actual cost of a minimum of 4 standards is going to be about $400,000. That would have the capability of doing both AC and DC. And then we would need additional vehicles and additional staffing. We're looking at an increase of at least a minimum of 2 staff members, possibly 3 staff members. 4 to 6 standards would need to be purchased with additional vehicles if we increase our staff members.
Got it. And when you say standards, that's the equipment that's plugging in to test a various standard.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, just making sure. And then, has your department calced out like a head count per charging station, or per, I guess per port's probably the right question. But do you have like a person per X number of units regulated that you think you need as this scales up, that you've all thought through?
So as long as we keep statute the same, that there's no specified time parameter of when MDA Weights and Measures is expected to come around and inspect, test, and certify these particular devices, then we should be able to increase our staff by 2 to 3 staff members, and that should be a reasonable amount. But honestly, these are things that are completely unknown because I don't know how many more chargers are going to go in the ground. I don't know how many of them are going to be commercially available. There's going to be a lot of variables, which are going to leave a large area of uncertainty. So some of the variables are going to be just initiating the transactions on these chargers. It's not like a gas station where you can walk in, ask the attendant to set pump number 3 for X amount of dollars so you can fill up 2 5-gallon standards, measure the product, and then return it into the ground for every meter. These stations, a lot of times these chargers are not even owned by the station. They're owned by another party completely that's not on the site, or they're in shopping malls, or they're at a library, or they're pretty much anywhere. And the problem with that is we don't have anyone to actually initiate. Was looking at different ways. They have state government credit cards, but they have multiple ones because some of the problems with initiating these transactions, yes, we may only need like 26 cents to run the whole test or $1 to run the whole test. But when you first use your credit card to initiate the transaction, it places a $20 hold. This is just for one port. So like a $20 hold, you've got a $26 charge, and sometimes they'll charge you like $1 or $2, additional fee for using that particular charger, not having a membership, whatnot. But say you have 8 different chargers and each of them have 2 different ports. That would be 6 separate meters, that particular site, that would need to be inspected, or 16. And to run your credit card like that many times, our state credit card's going to get shut down. That's what's happening in California. So ideally, there would be in the future, and I'm going to kind of bring this to the attention possibly of the conference, that they would have a weights and measures function that's accessible to weights and measures officials to be able to initiate transactions on these devices for the purpose of testing. But as of right now, no such function exists. So that's one of the problems that we're going to run into. Another problem we're going to run into is if we pull up to the site and by the time we get there, there's 4 cars charging and there's 6 ports total. We can only test 2 of those ports, especially if they're AC chargers. They could be there for hours. We're not going to be able to sit there and babysit those 4 cars essentially all day long, waiting for them to move to be able to set up our standards. And then the testing can vary depending upon the charging network. It could take, let's say, 10 minutes to run a test, or it could take an hour on an AC charger. It's just dependent upon how many different vehicles are hooked into that network and how much amperage you're able to pull through the charging system itself. So there's a lot of variables that are going to be difficult to work out. The idea is if we have 2 inspectors, they'd have 2 standards apiece. That way they can hook into one charger and start running the test, and then hook into another while that charger's running the test, and maybe conduct 2 different tests, whether it be on 2 separate chargers or 2 separate ports simultaneously, to be able to get the results. But like I said, there's a lot of variables, and I'm hoping 2 to 3 staff member increase would help. We would need to fund, not only fund them with their salaries, because once again, MDA weights and measures is special funded, so we don't receive general funds currently at this time or any grants. But we also need to purchase the standards, and originally the standards for just AC chargers were around $60,000 a piece. They've recently released the sale the DC chargers, which NIST recognizes, and they're close to $100,000 a piece. So that's $400,000 right there. If you pick up 2 vehicles specifically for this purpose, or add 2 inspectors to your fleet, they're going to need vehicles. So that's, say, $50,000 per vehicle. That's $100,000 right there, and a minimum of $100,000 for 2 inspectors' salaries annually, possibly more, depending upon if these are more subject matter experts and not just entry-level positions. I hope this helps.
I think it does. State agencies, other things that you would help you in calculating out a budget.
I would think if we are going to have a certain frequency of these chargers being inspected, then that would affect the budget needed.
So definitely, anytime you increase expected frequency of inspections, as of right now, like I said, device owners are required to maintain their device. We inspect all devices, dependent upon staffing and equipment availability and funding. But like I said, we have 18 inspectors currently with our department and 66,000 registered devices. That's everything from your small, medium, large capacity scales, rail scales, belt conveyor scales, vehicle scales, your small retail motor fuel devices such as your gas pumps, your high-speed diesels, your vehicle mounted LPG trucks, your meters on your trucks, your LPG stationaries, gray moisture meters, point of sale systems, and retail motor fuel devices such as vehicle mounted ones that deliver home heating oils and ones to loading racks. And with 66,000 of these devices, all of them have different levels of complexity due to their inspections and different standards that are used. And some of these devices, we only have a handful of standards that have to circulate through inspectors throughout the state. If there was a timeline, just as we have it set now without even adding EV, say it was specified for 1 year, we would need to go from 18 to probably 64 inspectors to staff. And like I said, we are special funded, and that would be another hurdle to cross. But we do answer to consumer complaints. That's one of our #1 priorities. We aim to inspect every device in the state of Maryland once every 2 to 3 years, and device owners are required to maintain their device.
This is Paul Verchinsky. Just a general question. When you have a new device that comes on that you have to regulate, is your oversight stepped up until that device gets mainstreamed? Because we're dealing with a new device here, and that's the big issue. And it's meant to replace over time gas stations, and if it's not reliable, we've got big time problems. Thank you.
So another
Paul.
question that we're trying to kind of, I'm sorry, do you want to go ahead?
Well, I had to go ahead and answer, Allison, and I might have a clarification question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So one of the ways that we help regulate new devices placed in service, to begin with, device owners are required to notify weights and measures before actually placing their device into service. That is set forth in statute. However, we have another program that we oversee. It's called a Registered Service Agency program. Registered service agencies conducting either placing these devices into initial service or repairing and returning devices such as a gas pump, a scale, a vehicle tank meter. And in the future chargers, they would be required to have the agency not only licensed with us, but each one of their technicians licensed. And they would be required to adhere to NIST Handbook 44 standards with the specifications, tolerances, and user requirements. Additionally, they're required to verify the accuracy of these devices when placed into service and submit a placed into service form certifying that these devices are accurate and correct for weights and measures review. Now, when we have like an entire new station that gets placed into service, a gas station or a grocery store, we aim to go to these sites and inspect them within the first 30 days of opening to ensure that they were placed in service correctly. And if these devices have been removed from service due to failure of an inspection, then once a technician certifies repairs and notifies us, we once again, even though that they have the ability to place devices back in service, we return to these locations and ensure that they conducted their work appropriately. These technicians will be required not only to register with us, but to pass National Conference on Weights and Measures testing in this particular area.
And Paul, my clarification question for you was that for NDA, or were you generally thinking, because I think I kind of break this into two issues. We have Handbook 44, which is all about accuracy of the charging station, but there's a number of issues that are, I think, related to uptime that are creeping in, such that it might make sense to combine the uptime, if there is an uptime standard under MDA versus having uptime standards under a different state agency. And so I guess my question for you was in terms of determining if your question was only about the accuracy question, or if it was about uptime as well.
No, it dealt with both.
Okay. So I don't think anyone has a good answer on the uptime yet, but I think that's something we'll need to think about as we put together the budgets.
So
I don't think anyone's really doing that today.
we are more than just tolerances. We are more than just accuracy. We're also specifications and user requirements. Now, I know that it's not the same exact wording as uptime, but there's different specifications that these devices will be required to adhere to per NIST Handbook 44, which may be very similar to uptime. They were discussed in our PowerPoint presentation. I think I gave a brief overview. It's obviously more complex than what I just provided you last week, but I think it's very similar. If you have any additional questions about that, let me know.
Yeah, and I think we'll be getting into that a lot in the next meeting when we go through the uptime discussion, or the nuts and bolts of determining uptime and accuracy.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right, so state agencies, I'll follow up on a separate email regarding budgets. The goal in my mind is around the beginning of September, we kind of have, I would say, ballpark estimates. They won't be anything firm, but things that then parties can take back and do corrections on after kind of beating around the bush with each other. I would say I'll check in at the next meeting with you all on how it's going, to determine if you've run it, where you're having trouble and that kind of stuff. But yeah, we'll try and do some of this through email on the budget developments.
I have
All
a
right.
quick question for MDA.
Go ahead.
Thanks. You said that Weights and Measures is their budget comes from special funds. Are those fees, or what are they?
So currently we have what's called device registration fees. They're set within statute, and each device that we register has an associated fee. Helps fund our departments. So say a gas pump, there's a specified fee per gas pump meter, as well as a location fee. Same thing with a small scale going all the way up to point of sale systems. So these particular device registration fees are renewed annually. As I said, that's what funds our budget. We start device registration renewal in March. Ideally, it would be completed by June 1st, because the certificate of registration that's required to be displayed in each business expires on the 31st of May of every year. And then that particular certificate of registration, which it's Maryland Department of Agriculture Weights and Measures. It states certificate of registration. It has the account number as well as the location, the device owner information and location, and the type of devices and the number of devices on that particular certificate.
Thanks.
You're
That's
welcome.
All right, we are coming close to time. I think we have a good draft framework, or I guess aspects of the draft framework that we can start solidifying down. We are going to, at the next meeting, I plan to have EVSEs talk in depth about other jurisdictions to help tailor it more. But I think we have, in terms of who we think we would consider under this framework, different areas and different ways we can think about enforcement, and also considering how you might identify who should be under the, or I guess registering these groups. Is there anything that we haven't discussed today regarding the, I would say, high level framework? This isn't getting into the nuts and bolts, which is really the next, which we'll spend time on the next meeting on. Is there any other discussions about framework or issues that we haven't discussed regarding it that people want to discuss? All right, so go ahead. All right, we're now at public comment time. So non-members, if there anything that you haven't had an opportunity to speak to today, put, I guess, raise your hand or put something in the chat and we'll let you speak up. Brett, is there anyone with a hand up?
Oh, I was on mute. No, there's no one with a hand up right now in the chat. And apologies, while I was sharing my screen, I wasn't able to view the chat box as intently. So there may be a couple of questions that we might be able to get to here. And Ben, I think we might have already addressed it, but I know Natalie had the most recent question in the chat box, which is there a way to have information on how to use the chargers in terms of leveling the charger power, i.e. space out of the EVs on the chargers to maximize charging speed?
I guess the question for Natalie before I speak to that is, Natalie, are you asking in terms of advertisement on the station, or is this reporting in terms of to the state as to what the charging can do? Or is it both? If you're speaking, you're on mute.
Ben, Natalie may be responding in the chat box.
The chat. All right. Well, I'll let her do that for now while we wait to see if Natalie's able to. Otherwise, we'll address it next meeting. The next meeting is on the 19th of August. It's currently scheduled 1 to 3. Members, I would like to address, there's two things I would like to ask. One, would you be amenable to having a longer meeting, either 3 or 4 hours? We are having good discussions in the group, but I think there's a number of items that we haven't been able to address as of yet to date that I think we really need to get to, and that's in the nuts and bolts. So there's a number of, I would say, kind of a laundry list of items in the bill that was passed related to how you determine uptime, or how you and that would be something that we do need to take I would think, a meeting to just walk through and discuss in depth, sort of like what we were doing today. But I think based on, we have a report due at the end of October. For us to probably put together a good report, I really need a lot of decisions made by the middle of September, end of September timeframe. So I'm getting a little worried in terms of pulling this all together, at least to address those bigger items. I think we can discuss framework and who's in charge within that time frame, but that longer list, I'm a little concerned about addressing in the time frame we have. So I was looking to see if maybe we could do a little bit more time. And my second offer is sometimes this is easier in person. And I could make that next meeting, and it would be I could make it a hybrid where if people wanted to come to the PSC offices, we could do a in-person discussion. I have done that before for another work group that was typically meeting virtual, but then we met in person. A lot more got done at that meeting. So I'll open it up to the floor. Thoughts about having a longer meeting and having it be in person if possible.
I
This
don't
should be
know
on
if how
the
many
19th.
people this, sorry.
Go ahead, sorry. Go ahead, Senator, sorry.
Sorry, I don't know how many people this affects, but that's the Democratic National Convention. And so for folks who are going to be in Chicago, it's going to be really challenging to do that. And that, you know, I could be the only, I don't know if my colleagues are going to be there.
Sorry, I did not. Yep, I'm just following our typical cadence. So you'll be there. Senator Watson, Delegate Frazier, Hidalgo, are you going to be there? Or be impacted because you'd rather be paying, or not rather, but you part of your job would be paying attention to that convention?
This is Senator Watson. I will not be going to the convention, so I'll be able to participate.
Okay. All right. So Senator, you wouldn't be able to make the 19th, though, it sounds like.
I mean, I might be able to do it in the middle of the day for a couple of hours, but I would hate if, yeah, look, if I'm the only one it affects, then go ahead.
Yeah, I will do the other time that has been identified as a strong contenders are Fridays, in the afternoon. I can send around a survey and we can do it based off of who's available, and I'd be looking at either the 19th or the 23rd. My goal is though that this would be a longer meeting, because I do think or if members are okay having a back-to-back meeting where we meet 2 weeks in a row to try and work through some of these issues. I can probably, so I can get a survey out there if that would be easier, and we'll have results out by the end of this week. All right.
That would be great. I mean, I could do the afternoon of the 23rd, but again, I don't want you to do this around me if I'm the only one it affects.
All right. So here's what we'll do, members. I will send. Currently, the meeting is penciled for the 19th, 1 to 3. A survey will be circulated with you all this week, looking at the 19th or the 23rd, and I will give time and asking for time frames. Goal would be to have a longer meeting. All right. Thank you, everyone, for your time today, and I will talk with you soon. Thank you.
Have fun at the KOA.
Thanks.
Oh, I will.